Hello and welcome, I'm Oleh Horbachov and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. On June 30th, the International Court of Justice in The Hague started public hearings in the case Ukraine versus Russia. Ukraine filed the case 2 years ago, accusing Russia for financing militants in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions and for discrimination against national minorities in the occupied Crimean peninsula. To discuss the case, we welcome to our studio today Oleh Horbachov, international lawyer. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So, Mr. Horbachov, during the first day of the hearings, Russian delegation had the first word, and basically the narrative didn't really differ from the statements that were expressed 2 years ago during the preliminary hearings. Russian delegation was calling Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity a rebellion, an upheaval, and basically was trying to justify the Kremlin's aggression. So this is just a brief notice for our audience. What are your thoughts on the first day of hearings?
Yes, Russian Federation continues to justify the aggression against Ukraine in Crimea and Donbass, but Ukraine states that nevertheless the Russian arguments, the Russian Federation shall be responsible for annexation of Crimea and violation of human rights on the territory of Crimean peninsula,
right.
as well as on sponsoring the militants on the territory of Donbass. So Ukrainian arguments based on that the Russian Federation violates two conventions: the Convention for the Suppression of Financing of Terrorism and the Convention of the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination. So
right.
this case is very important for Ukraine, and is very important in order to for Ukraine to increase its lawsuits against Russian Federation in order to intensify the pressure on the Russian Federation on international level.
Mm-hmm. This is very interesting because according to Oleh Horbachov, the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, the first thesis of the Russian Federation is that Ukraine artificially tries to fit the violations into the jurisdictions of the two conventions. How could you comment on that?
Yes, if we see all the previous cases when the Russian Federation and Ukraine were on such public lawsuits, the position of Russian Federation is unchangeable. It states that it has lack of jurisdiction, and as well as in International Court for Law C, the position of Russian Federation was unchangeable. It has a lack of jurisdiction, but nevertheless, the Ukraine states that the Russian Federation is responsible for violation of these conventions, and it should be responsible responsible for committing the crimes for violation of human rights, and also for financing of terrorism on the territory, on the occupied territory of Ukraine.
Well, the representative of Ukraine at the International Criminal Court, Jean-Marc Touverin, also expressed his opinion on this matter. Let's listen.
Russia has not fulfilled its obligations to the court. It did not carry out an investigation into the case of financing terrorism in Ukraine, did not initiate criminal proceedings against individuals and organizations financing terrorism, inaction, delaying the case, lack of cooperation in the investigation. Such behavior is a clear violation of Russia's obligations under the convention.
So, in your opinion, how strong is Ukraine's strategy in this case?
Ukraine's strategy is very good in this case, and
we see that we have the representatives from the International Criminal Court participating in the hearings, and also I do know that there are some professors from the Great Britain.
Yes, there are a lot of specialists in the field of international law, which help to uphold the Ukrainian position in this lawsuit, and Ukraine also represents a lot of written submissions which confirms that Russia was committed crimes against humanity, committed crimes against Ukrainian people and against minorities such as Crimean Tatar people, Russian Federation also didn't fulfill the interim measures which were upheld against it, such as the interim measures which was against Russian Federation
to resume
to resume the activity of Crimean Tatar body, such as Majlis, and Russian Federation didn't fulfill such interim measures, and it fulfilled in the previous cases, such as the interim measures against Ukrainian sailmen. So Russia didn't fulfill all international obligation in such cases.
Yeah, we can clearly see that Russia is not really adhering to the sentences, and I would like to talk to you about this a little bit later. The important fact to mention is that Oleh Horbachov, again, the representative of Ukraine, let's remind the audience, the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, she said that Ukraine is presenting 17,500 pages of evidence. And basically, just to remind the audience, the charges include the provision of weapons and other forms of assistance to illegal armed formations, shooting down the MH17, shelling the residential areas in Mariupol, Kramatorsk, then destruction of the civilian bus in Volnovakha, and lots of accidents. There is the whole list, so I do think that all the 17,500 pages concern all of the list, all this list of charges against Russia, but Russia keeps denying its involvement in the war in eastern Ukraine, and it keeps pushing on this message that the International Court of Justice doesn't have the jurisdiction to review the case. So how could you comment on this?
Yes, in this context, we should stress out that Russian position is unchangeable, and
but is it weak or is it strong? Because I can't really understand. Because the narrative is the same. To me personally, Ukrainian position looks like a strong one, and this is a very positive sign that even the lawyers from abroad, from different countries, and representatives of other international courts, they participate in the process. But what about the Russian position? I just want your analysis on this.
Yes, Russian position is such a position in these cases because she had committed a lot of wrongful acts against Ukraine and and it committed a lot of crime against humanity. So on its essence, of this dispute, it had nothing to say. That is why the Russian position is such as in these cases, because Russian Federation had nothing in order to justify according to international law, its actions against Ukraine, and its position is unchangeable, as in cases of private Ukrainian companies in international arbitration courts. For the lawsuits such of companies as Privabank, Bank, and in these cases the Russian position is unchangeable, that the Russian Federation has no jurisdiction in order to consider such cases.
Thank you for that interesting comment. Also worth mentioning that another comment of Oleh Horbachov, right? We're gonna talk a lot about her statements today, as she is one of the main representatives of Ukraine at the hearings. She said that Russia is trying to, well, with the approach that it has, Russia is trying to prolong or drag out the process, and we have a soundbite on this. Let's watch.
I must express Ukraine's dismay at Russia's lack of respect for a binding order of this court. The situation was urgent 2 years ago, and it is even more urgent today. The major list remained banned. Ukrainian language education has all but disappeared in Crimea. The Crimean Tatar children are taught from new textbooks that seek to justify the mass deportation of their people by Stalin in 1944. Moreover, Russia continues to this day to aggravate the situation and to multiply its unlawful actions.
So even if the process will be prolonged, how this can possibly benefit Russia?
In this context, we should wait when the final decision was awarded against Russian Federation, and we hope that this decision will be positive. At first stage, the decision for the upholding of jurisdiction, that Russia has jurisdiction to consider such a cases, and the next stage is considering such a case in its essence and its consideration of all written evidences which were put forward by Ukraine on 17,000 copies, and we should wait. Should wait the final decision against Russian Federation, and if Russia will not fulfill such a decision, we should intensify the pressure on Russian Federation by upholding sanctions mechanism against Russia.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, let's see when the court will start considering the case. Still, we have this public hearings ongoing until June 7th. Could Ukraine expect any temporary measures taken by the court, as it was with the preliminary hearings?
Temporary measures. So there were temporary measures 2 years ago, interim measures.
Yes. And Russia didn't fulfill any of them. Can Ukraine expect any temporary interim measures taken this time on June 7th?
At this time, we should wait when the court should draw with the final decision on the jurisdiction, and we think that in this year, this decision or the decision of the jurisdiction may be awarded against Russian Federation, and the next stages will be the considering of the case in its essence.
Mm-hmm. Well, also it's interesting because the preliminary hearings started in March 2017. Why did it take 2 years until the next round, until the next stage, the public hearings? Why does it take so long to continue this process?
This process is very long due to the position of Russian Federation, which fulfill all the actions in order to such process will be suspended, and it challenge the jurisdiction, and then it will be challenge all the Ukrainian written evidences, and the Russian Federation actions at such processes are unchangeable, and it tries to suspend such a process.
Mm-hmm. Well, you reminded that the court decision from the 2017, the UN court decision that obliged Russia to stop discriminating Ukrainians in Crimea and allow Crimean Tatar Majlis to continue working. And, as we know, Russia ignored the decision. If Russia refuses from fulfilling any court decision, then what? Is there any range of possible consequences that Russia might face?
The only mechanism in order to make Russia to fulfill such a decision is intensifying of sanctions against Russian Federation for non-fulfillment of such international obligations, such as these temporary decisions. So Ukraine should, on all international platforms, by using the diplomacy mechanism to try to intensify the sanctions against Russia Federation.
Also, then it's worth mentioning that the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea has recently issued the ruling that demands Russia to release all the 24 Ukrainian sailors who were illegally held captive there. So the seamen haven't been released yet. There is still time until the end of July, but so it's interesting to get to know a bit more about the courts, because we know that the rulings of the International Criminal Court leave no ways for the conflict party to bypass or somehow to escape from the penalty, right? So this is like the most severe court process. Could you please explain us the importance of the hearings of this case in the UN International Court of Justice?
This process is very crucial in order to Ukraine will have a positive decision, because this will be the basis for intensifying a sanction against Ukraine, and also the position of Russian Federation in Security Council, which is the permanent member, and maybe such violations of international norms of international law. This basis in order to change the right of right of veto in Security Council of Russian Federation, and satisfy all such decision as preliminary and final decision are very important for Ukrainian position in order to intensify the pressure against Russia Federation in all international tribunals, in all international platforms, and on the perspective, it's very crucial in order to intensify the international pressure of all world against Russian Federation.
Yeah, Ukraine currently has a lot of processes ongoing against Russia, and on June 10th through 14th, I would like to remind that we'll have Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague having the first hearing in the case of Ukraine against Russia over Moscow's violation of international maritime law in the Black and Azov Seas and also in the Kerch Strait. So let's keep an eye on that process as well, and I hope that in the nearest future we can discuss again the ongoing process in The Hague and the new one. Thank you so much for your comments, and thank you for having a time to come to our studio. That was Oleh Horbachov, international lawyer. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.